So we did that video on Evergrande, and after that, now Dean has something he wants to share with you guys.
So, when you asked me about Evergrande, I mean, I knew what the situation was because it dealt with the markets and property bubble, so I got exposure to that and just my daily things. But I was always curious, like, how'd you get there, And last night I was, my end of day going through all the articles, looking at the market stuff. I ran across an old video on CNBC, and I had Pro, so it had that. So I watched it and it was fascinating to me. Like, me, I'm like kind of a nerd when it comes to these things, and I think it's like fascinating. So anyways, so how do you get to Evergrande? How did China get into this property bubble and this decline and all that kind of stuff? The buzz in China, it's in the downturn. Anyone who's in the markets, stay away from China stocks, right? So it's interesting to me because if what happened really was, back in the 80s, up until the 80s in China, there was no property ownership because it's communist, right? The state owns everything, socialism, communism, it's, there's no private ownership, right? And then, comes into the 80s, right? China opened up its economy. Everyone remembers, right? I mean, people old like me remember. All of a sudden everything's made in China and then Costco took off, whatever, right? So their economy started growing. So what happens, industrial revolution, right? If you study history, right? Everyone moves from the villages, from an agricultural economy to a industrialized economy. So all these people, China's a lot of people, right? Billions. They move to the cities and guess what? There's no place to stay. Not enough housing, right? So the communist government, CCP at the time, like, just like in the Soviet Union, if you go to, I've been to Moscow, you see like all these terrible buildings. They built public housing through the communist state, and everyone gets given a house, whatever it may be, right? And then, to take a step back, in 1979, sorry, I have these notes. I find it fascinating. In 1979, no one owned a home in China. Today, 80 to 90% of the Chinese population own homes, and 20% of them own more than one. That's how crazy it got, bubble, right? So in 1988, so I found interesting, in 1988, the government was like, we can't keep building this housing. We just can't keep up. So we have to figure something out, right? And the land is all owned by the state. So what they did was they separated land ownership and land use. And they allowed the local governments to sell land use. And that's when everything started. Right? So they started selling these land use rights to developers who in turn build houses on it and sell each person a leasehold. I mean, people who live in other countries are familiar with, leaseholds are pretty common around the world, the state governments could sell the leasehold and they got rich. And the Chinese Communist Party, the central government, right, were like, oh, man, you guys are making all the money, no, change the law, right? And saying, I need a piece of that. Like, I want a piece of that, and I want you to keep doing that because all of a sudden we're getting all these revenues, right? So in 94, right, the government basically went all in, the central government went all in on this and pushed the local governments to keep doing it. So they kept just creating all this land that they had and selling the land use rights to all these developers. And there comes Evergrande, Country Garden, all these crazy property development companies that are in the hole right now, and then in the 90s, the housing started going crazy and everyone started putting money into housing because that's like a piggy bank for them, right? And then along comes, let me take a step back. The problem with that is the way the system works. I think I explained this in the Evergrande, how Evergrande operated, how the property market operated there. You have to give a sizable down payment, so to speak, or a deposit when you want to go buy an apartment. And the thing isn't even built yet. The ground isn't even, hasn't even been demoed yet or graded yet. You don't see anything there, you got to pay pay a lot of money. So what the developers do is that creates liquidity for them. That's their funding, right? So so this thing kept going and going and going. And, in 2013, here comes Xi Jinping. And Xi doesn't like this. he could see the bubble. He sees this is speculation. And he came out and when he got elected, he already said, I'm going to put a stop to this. And in 2017, he basically came out and said, housing is for the living and not for speculation. So what they did was the government wanted to stop this growth was they went and restricted the amount of debt all these developers could carry. And that started the bubble, the bubble popping. The bubble was boop, 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 until that happened, and then it's popping up until today. And then what happened to make things even worse, right? The developers couldn't get enough funding because they were capped on how much they could borrow, right? And then COVID hit a couple of years later. And what happened during COVID? You saw how bad the Chinese situation was in COVID, right? They were locked down in their homes. People, remember you see all those videos of people like yelling at each other and they were stuck in their house and then, they were like forcefully made to like quarantine and stuff like that. What ended up happening, is twofold. Number one, people got pissed off after COVID, and guess what? They moved away from the cities. So you had all these things that were built with no one to buy them, right? And secondly, because of COVID, you caused a big economic depression in China. All the factories had to shut. Big youth unemployment. So there goes your demographic that can afford homes, right? And all that, basically, you reach to a point where this whole bubble popping now has this is 8.9 trillion in debt. How are you going to repay that debt? No one's going to buy those homes. And to make it even worse, companies like Evergrande, Country Garden, and all the developers started raising capital offshore. That means they set up Cayman Island companies and raised capital and got investments from the outside of China. So that was more fuel for that bubble. Right? Because everyone thought the Chinese government is not going to let their property market go down because it's like 20% of their GDP. It's what's fueling their growth. It's a significant part of their growth. But now, once you pop that bubble, you can't put the air back in. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. I just found it interesting.
That's cool. Mm-hmm.